Good evening, day walkers and night stalkers. This is take three. Hopefully, we can get everything to work out. I had Kane barking all the way through take two. And of course, Facebook screwed up on the first one. So hopefully, my voice will hold out. I doubt it. But you guys stick with me, and I will get this posted as soon as humanly possible. As I'm starting from the beginning of the show, I have to give a shout out to all of my fantastic sponsors. There's Big Time Vapes at 711 Memorial Boulevard in Picayune, Mississippi. You can find them on Facebook. If you are trying to kick the habit, they have the mods and supplies that you need. If your favorite vape shop is out of supplies, trust me, Big Time Vapes has it in stock. Give them a call. You can find their information here on Facebook, and they do ship. Also, ask them about all of their incredible home blended juice. I already have it, though. Also, our friends at Coffee Shop of Horrors. Yes, these are two of my favorites. This one, of course, are 54 plus, incredibly created, mastered, blended flavors that you can find at Coffee Shop of Horrors. You can go to authorlyngibson.com, go to my sponsors link, and click on that, and it will remind you that once you finish shopping every entire order. Remember, folks, if you're waking up in the morning and you're drinking coffee and not leaving a wet spot, you're drinking the wrong coffee. I have those for you. There is nothing better than opening your door and finding a case of wine sitting there waiting for you. Free shipping on your first case, $100 off. You can mix and match your case, all whites, all reds, all pinks, whatever you want, or a little bit of everything. Now is the best time in the world to be supporting mom and pop businesses, and that's what Naked Wines does. They do not use big commercial vineries. They use mom and pop vineries to fill their cases with different blends, different types of wines. And I've been a consumer for quite a while now and have not found a wine yet that I don't like, at least from Naked Wines anyway. So if you want that voucher, message me on Facebook at Southern Horror Queen, and I will get you that code, and you can get rolling with your first order from Naked Wines. If you've had a bad day, come home, pour yourself a glass. Somebody's going to get naked. If that's a bad thing, drink more. It'll get better, right? Also, got to give a shout out to my favorite airbrush artist, Eddie Milburn. He created this incredible venom there at the entrance. Ooh, Lord. Yes, definitely. He can create all kinds of custom-made masks. He doesn't keep them in stock, but you can order them, send those to him in Cecil, Kentucky, and he can airbrush pretty much anything you want on there. He's an incredible artist, and I don't put anything at all past him because he's awesome like that. All right, folks, so I'm going to try to trudge through Witch Legends one more time so we at least have a decent stream for you guys to watch and hopefully enjoy at your convenience. So let's talk about witches, more specifically a few famous graves of some of these dark and twisted sisters. As we all know, witches have been around for a very, very long time. That'll give you some ammunition to argue down your favorite Southern Baptist pew warmer right there. So anyway, even though folks in their communities really depended heavily on them, especially when they were sick or when times were hard or needed a love potion or whatever the case may be, it never failed that these turned their backs on these witches when things got bad. So there were, of course, a lot of women that were doomed, both by rightfully and some unjustly accused of witchcraft, and of course having made pacts with the devil. So during the witch hunt craze that started back in the 15th century and lasted to the 17th century, an estimated 40,000 people were executed for witchcraft in Western Europe. In America, the hunt spread to the colonial colonies in New England and Connecticut and New Haven, and of course the notorious Salem witch trials in Massachusetts. The most common method of execution, as we know, was of course hanging, drowning, or being burned at the stake, but there were, of course, many others that were used. Now, most of the final resting places of these witch hunt victims have been lost to history, but there's a few exceptions. Here's a few graves that, or burial sites that make a sobering reminder of some of the darkest eras in our history. Now, we've spoken here recently on the stream about Julia Brown from our Manchac Swamp. Remember her? That was the chick that, of course, took care of the entire community there. And, of course, they all turned their backs on her. And she cursed the entire town and told them that she was going to destroy this town. And lo and behold, they did a whole lot. And tonight I wanted to tell you guys about some legends that you may not have heard of. Of course, these guys, they deserve their 5 minutes of fame too, right? So first off, kind of local to here, but not exactly in my stomping grounds, is the Witch of Yazoo. Now, she actually shares a few of the same characteristics as the sirens from Greek mythology. And according to the legend, in the late 1800s, there was this witch who lived under or lived near the Yazoo River. And she was caught torturing fishermen that she had lured in from the river. Well, when the authorities come to check her house out, and as she sank into her death, she swore a curse that she would return in 20 years and see the city burn. So these folks were terrified by the threat of her curse. So her body was buried on hallowed ground, and heavy chains were installed over her grave to hopefully keep her from rising. But in 1904, her prophecy came true. The city of Yazoo burned to the ground. The day after the flames died out, a lot of folks, of course, are surveying the damage, trying to hunt down their loved ones. Well, some of the village folks gathered together and went out to her grave, and guess what they found? The chains had been broken in two. So the townfolk replaced and reinforced those chains, and ever since, the witch's grave has remained done at her gravesite. And as a matter of fact, my friend David Childers of the Mississippi Paranormal Research Institute actually filmed a live ghost hunt there a few years down at her grave. I'm now tongue-tied. My wine's almost gone, and my voice is leaving me, so you guys bear with me because this is now 2.5 hours of going through witch legends. Hopefully we'll get you a quality stream though. So anyway, some of the madness that has been encountered there at her grave are things like orbs and misty figures that have been photographed, voices and laughing recorded, and all kinds of other crazy stuff. So it's definitely a place that's worth visiting. Next up is the grave of Meg Shelton. In the late 17th century, the people of Wood Plumpton, a small village in England, suspected that Meg was animal at night, so she would remain undetected. Well, according to the legend, Meg was crushed to death by a barrel that pinned her to a wall. And when she was out at a small, tight shaft, so that if she tried to dig her way out, she'd actually be digging in the wrong direction. Then they covered the hole with this massive stone so that she would never escape. The stone remains to this day. It's in the boneyard at St. Anne's Church, and next to it is a plaque that warns visitors that the witch of Wood Plumpton lies buried beneath. Then there's the Chesterville Witch. In a small graveyard in the heart of Illinois, and mysteriously shows up in a nearby field. Terrified that she'd come back to life to seek her revenge, the townsfolk buried her, and they planted an oak tree over her grave to mark her location. The legend goes on to say that that tree contains her soul, and that if it's ever cut down or destroyed, the ghost of the townspeople in Scotland in 1704. The church actually coerced her into confessing that she was the devil's wife. So she dies in prison before she could be tried, sentenced, and burned for witchcraft. She got a lucky break there, right? So her body was taken to the beach off her into a muddy tomb to prevent her from tormenting the living. But legend says that her body vanished when high tide came, and all that remained was a massive stone that they left there to mark her grave. In St. Charles, Missouri, you'll find the grave of Molly Crenshaw. Molly was around in search of cures or hexes, but one year, after a particularly nasty drought, the locals turned against her and executed her. Go figure, right? In order to prevent her from rising from her grave, they chopped her body into pieces and buried it all out in the woods around this remote cemetery. That wasn't enough. Year after year, the pieces of her body came closer and closer together until she was made whole. Now, nobody knows exactly where the spot is where she came to rest, but it's said that if anybody who successfully finds her, there's a story about two football players who went looking for the grave in the 1950s. Well, apparently, they found it, and they met with that gruesome fate. The sheriff's deputies found their bodies impaled on the graveyard fence. And check out this little tale. There's this ghost town that used to be the village of Pear Cheney, and beneath its ruins is one hell of a tragic history. The remaining cemetery, which houses the graves of around 90 people, is rumored to be the home of a witch's grave, as well as a shit ton of supernatural occurrences. Now, Pear Cheney was originally settled in 1874 by lumberjacks who thought the site of the local sawmill was a great spot to set down roots. In 1881, its population had grown to 922. But a few years later, diphtheria swept through the area and most of the children died. As the community struggled to recover, a fire broke out, and in 1893 there was an outbreak of smallpox, scarlet fever, and another bout of diphtheria. By 1818, only 18 residents remained. The village was completely abandoned. According to legend, people from surrounding communities say that these epidemics and the fires were caused by a witch who cursed the land after she was banished to the surrounding wilderness. She was later hung from a tree in a cemetery and her body was burned. To this day, some visitors claim to see her ghost in Cheney Cemetery. I'd say she got her revenge. So, throughout history, there's been tons of superstitious preventative means in which people have tried to prevent witches from rising from the grave, just like vampires. It seemed that death was never punishment enough, no matter the amount of torment or torture endured in the process. During a recent archaeological dig of a witch's graveyard in Tuscany, archaeologists discovered an 800-year-old remains of a woman that they believe died in the Middle Ages. It seems the people in the area were so worried that she'd use her powers to bring herself back from the dead that they drove 7 nails through her jawbone, and more had been to keep dead people firmly in their graves. So, next up with a few other awesome witch legends. John Bell, not our John Bell Edwards, was a farmer who bought a 320-acre farm in Robertson County, Tennessee. So he and his family moved there in 1804. Well, their first 13 years there were peaceful and prosperous. The trouble started in 1817 after John spotted and shot at this hideous creature in his pasture. Soon after, the family started seeing other weird-looking creatures roaming around on the property, and then the kids were plagued with night terrors, and the sounds of knocking and scratching could be heard on the outer walls of their home every single night. It wasn't long before the noises were being heard inside of the home. Noises like rats gnawing on bedposts and chains being dragged across wooden floors and the sound of somebody choking. And then came the voices. Whispers at first, but as time goes on, these whispers turn to screams. So things were getting worse, and it seemed that John and his daughter Betsy were taking the brunt of the attacks. Poor Betsy'd be slapped and pinched and have her hair pulled, and John would suffer with choking. His throat would visibly swell, and he'd say that it felt as though a stick was wedged in his windpipe. So the family had had enough, and they go out into the community for help, and an investigation was opened up. Well, those that participated actually witnessed the torments of the family firsthand. Soon, people from miles around were coming to witness the haunting of the Bell Witch, who at this point had gained so much strength that even though she couldn't be seen, she was present and future, and would often answer questions or make predictions for gathering crowds, all while attacking the Bell family on a daily basis. Well, after 3 straight years of these endless torments, John Bell was becoming weaker and weaker, and finally, on December 20th in 1820, he dies. The Bell Witch took full credit for his death and bid farewell to all who were present. She left with the promise of returning in 7 years, which she did. She returned to the home of John Bell Jr., and she had a long conversation with him about the past, the present, and the future, and even made predictions for his life's outcome. She left again with the promise of returning in 107 years, which would have been 1935. Now, if she did or not, no one really knows for sure, but the locals there would tell you that they don't think she ever left because there were continued sightings and sporadic attacks in the woods surrounding the Red River. That's where the Bells had built their home. Well, when the Bell Witch finally abandoned tormenting the family, she retreated to what is now known as the Bell Witch Cave. Active in this area since the 1800s, but she's starting to become active in the area again, right there where her legend originated. So the cave is located in the center of a large bluff that overlooks this river. The opening's really wide, but the cavern itself can't be accessed without trudging through this long, narrow tunnel. And once you're through the tunnel, there's a large opening that opens up into another tunnel, and then an overhead passageway. And at the end of that tunnel is another large opening. Beyond that, it's unknown because all of those passageways there are too narrow to explore. So they haven't been. One other interesting tidbit, there's an Indian burial mound between the cave and the surface of the bluff. The Bell Witch Cavern has been open to the public since Bill Eden purchased the property. He quite enjoyed taking groups down this treacherous path and then into the cavern. Bill shared not only the legends, but his own personal experiences, as well as encounters had by other tourists while they were there in the cavern. One of the first experiences that a visitor had on Bill's tour is often shared. This woman had contacted him to schedule a tour for a group. Well, once they arrive, Bill starts leading them through the woods towards the cavern. Not quite half the way there, all at once this woman, the leader of the group, that something had shoved her down and she couldn't get back up. It was like she was being held there by some unseen force. So it takes several of the other members of the group to pry the woman to her feet. And by the time they get her up, she's frantic and she declares that tour is over and she demanded to be taken back to her car. So, of course, Bill had plenty of experiences of his own. He's often heard footsteps and even encountered what he claims to be the witch herself on several occasions. He describes a figure as if someone had their back turned to him. The apparition was solid. Most of the time dark, but sometimes white, like fresh snow. The perfect outline of someone from behind, with the exception of the fact that there was nothing from the ankles down. The figure, a group of young people that he took into the cavern for a tour. They had walked all the way through and stopped in the last room, and they're all sitting there listening to Bill describe his past experiences. Well, one young lady starts voicing her doubts about the validity of his claims. Through the stories and into the trip back toward the entrance, the girl's still complaining that all of this is bullshit. She worked herself into such a frenzy that she starts walking ahead of Bill as he's leading the group out. When she gets a few, immediately she insisted somebody had slapped her. So Bill helps her up to her feet, and when they get to the entrance of the cave, they examine her face, and they see this huge red welt in the shape of a handprint across her cheek. Just suddenly had the visual of Medea saying, "How you like me now, bitch?" Apparently, the Bell Witch doesn't take well to rejection. That girl wasn't the only one that's had a reality check there. Bill had taken a group of soldiers on that tour. And just like the girl, one of them continued to voice his doubts about Bill's story. So in the same large room at the end of the cavern, all of them were sitting there listening to Bill's stories. And when it came time to lead him back up to the opening, all of them stood except for that one, Doubting Thomas. Seems he couldn't get up, and he couldn't breathe. He managed to grunt out that it felt like there were arms wrapped around him, squeezing him tightly and also holding him down to the rock where he was sitting. His buddies all think he's joking, so they're all laughing it up and everything. Well, Bill walks over to take a closer look at Doubting Thomas, and he goes into panic mode, and he's begging for help. So he was drenched with a cold sweat, and his face was all clammy. This dude was about to pass out. Well, Bill and some of the other soldiers start prying. Eventually, he snaps out of it, and by the time they reach the entrance, he was fine. But again, the Bell Witch had administered one hell of a reality check. When Bill passed away, the farm was purchased by Chris and Walter Kirby. Now, Walter uses the soil there to grow tobacco, while Chris is followed a treacherous path that led to the cave. And they've added an electrical system along with a few other minor improvements. Chris now has many tales of her own to share, just like Bill. Some of her own encounters and some are things that were experienced there by tourists. She's had encounters not only in the cave, but in her house and on other parts of the property. One of the first experiences with a tour was arriving at the entrance to lead guests in. And once inside, there's the sound of this rattle journals that are filled with experiences, such as footsteps and people being pushed, kind of the same effect of being pinned to the ground as well. Both sheets the walls of the cavern. There are many times with flashlights and cameras along on these tours fail, and there's all kinds of other sounds and sensations that are experienced on these tours. Many folks that have gone to this cave thought it'd be really cool to bring home some little keepsakes. Not so much. Not one of them escaped unscathed. Everything from car wrecks to unexplained illnesses have affected them until that keepsake is returned. Chris says that she warns every single group against taking home even the smallest rock, but there's always some asshole that doesn't listen, saying, "Sorry, I should have listened. Please put this back where it belongs," or something along those lines. So if you find yourself anywhere near Adams, Tennessee, reach out to Chris and schedule a tour. Just remember, if you pick something up to take back with you, you're going to get more than you bargained for. Then there's the tale of Moll Dyer. That legend states that Moll lived in Maryland, just like the Blair Witch supposedly did. According to legend, Dyer had the reputation of being an herbalist, and she treated and healed many people in the village. Dyer kept to herself in a small cottage at the edge of the forest and away from town. She was, of course, suspected of practicing witchcraft, but wasn't hassled due to the fact that she had helped so many folks there. But, of course, as they always do, things changed in the winter of 1697. The weather was brutal, food became scarce, and on top of it all, this vicious illness was running rampant through the town, taking with it the lives of many. It was suspected that this series of unfortunate events was the result of a curse cast upon the town by Dyer. So, sets it on fire. Dyer flees for her life into the woods, and when she feels that she's safe from this vicious mob, she kneels down on this large stone and with one hand raised to the heavens and the other one beneath her to support her weight, she brings down upon this town a curse so powerful that it drained her of her strength. Dyer collapses under the stone where she freezes to death. So it's several days later when she's discovered frozen to the stone. When she was removed, there beneath her in the stone was the impression of her knee and her hand, evidence of the strength she'd exerted when casting her spell. Remember that Blair Witch that had a rock curse associated with her? So this stone was moved to the front of the courthouse to serve as a reminder, and it's still there today. Though Dyer's imprints are barely visible now, it's said that cameras are known to malfunction and folks become struck with pains or illnesses where her persecutors are renewing her curse. Another legend is very scant tale about three witches of Auckland. There are very few details that can be found, and this is all that I could verify. In the 1800s, there were three witches that were hanged in Auckland, and they've haunted this area ever since. There's a statue of three muses in an Auckland park that is near the area where the hangings took place. The muses are said to resemble the witches. Tell the witches that, right? Because this is where they're known to hang out. Throughout the years, there have been countless reports of parkgoers being attacked by these cackling hags, and other folks have reported having seen the witches jumping from tree to tree while screeching and howling loud enough to wake the dead. It's said that there's one surefire way to encounter these witches. Drive down the lane where they were hanged and turn off your lights. You'll see them freed of their nooses and floating around in the treetops. And this legend right here is crazy. Check this out. So this dude Rustin was a hermit that lived in the woods just outside of Burkittsville, Maryland. His story starts out with him frequently encountering this woman in a cloak and hood during his that same winter, he starts hearing her voice at night when he was asleep. He thought it was just a dream, right? Well, not long after that, her voice began to come to him during the day. and whisper things in different languages, sometimes repeating the same word over and over and over again. It wasn't long after that the voices became constant, sometimes telling him to do things. Now, that sometimes they were meaningless things, like he was being told to sleep in the cellar for weeks at a time. But regardless of what it was he was told to do, he was powerless to resist. Well, in November of 1940, Rustin was told by the voice to go into Burkittsville and take the first two children that he saw. One of the two children taken was Kyle Brody, who would actually be the only framed symbols into little Emily's face. 2 days later, he cut Emily open and removed her insides. Rustin would frequently stop in the middle of his work and he'd ask Kyle if he could hear that woman's voice. Kyle, of course, would stand there and cry and answer no and beg Rustin to stop what he was doing. Rustin would then tell him, "Don't cry," that he would soon bring someone else for him. All in all, 7 children met the same fate. When the last of them was murdered, the woman appeared to Rustin, instructing him to complete one last task. She told Rustin to go into town and admit what he had done. When the police followed Rustin back to his home, they found Kyle standing on the front porch, obviously in a state of shock. But that wasn't all that they found. In the cellar, there were 7 shallow graves that contained the mutilated remains of children that he had been instructed to take. So Rustin was arrested and found guilty. He was hanged in the fall of 1941. Kyle spent the remainder of his life in and out of jail or mental institution, floor of his cell. Later, after gathering Kyle's belongings to be removed, a notebook was found. And inside the notebook was writing in the language of witchcraft. Remember, witchcraft is written from right to left. This same language was found written on the walls of Rustin's cellar. It would seem that Kyle probably picked up the language from Rustin. However, it was a well-known fact that Rustin could neither read nor write. All right, folks, so hopefully third time's a charm, and we might have a decent stream on witch legends. Thank you so much for sticking in here with me. My head stopped up, my voice is cracking, but I think we got a good take this time. Remember, visit authorlynnGibson.com, check out my books and my blog, and definitely support those sponsors. Those are some wonderful people out there, and they're all pretty much mom and pop shops. So check them out, support them, use those discount codes that are right there on their links. And we will see you back here on YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe right here to my YouTube page because damn Facebook, I've had it. All right, folks, you guys have a wonderful week and an even better weekend. And I will see you next week, Tuesday night, 7 Central, 8 Eastern. You guys keep it creepy.